Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our new think tank, Ember. Let ideas burn. So, we are going to be we are forming this group kind of to discuss uh, new political principles going forward, kind of reestablishing from a grassroots perspective uh, our thoughts on political principles and what we think would be necessary for the political leaders and thought leaders of tomorrow within America. So here we have Karlyn from Karlyn Borysenko, kb.locals.com. Kevin from Engineering Politics, very similarly, engineeringpolitics.locals.com. Truman from Return to Reason, returntoreason.locals.com.
No, I just sell essential oils now.
Oh, you're just selling essential oils? Okay, perfect. And my name is James Derian. I am commutationconstruct.locals.com. And this is mostly just going to be a casual conversation where we introduce ourselves and give our thoughts about what we hope to get out of this project. Anyhow, I suppose I'll go first. So my name is James Derian. With Ember, I have had the idea that we want to reignite the spark of ideas that really helped establish the U.S., carry the country forward for the past 250 years, and ensure that the most important principles to us would be sort of reforged to carry us through another 250 years plus. Over time, it's somewhat natural within nations that their principles take a beating over the years. And I believe it's necessary to sort of give them that refinement, put them back in the forge to make sure they maintain their strength. So for me, creating this think tank was it's really a bit of a passion project and something to help that I want to do to make sure that we have the future for the coming generation, something that gives deeper thought and goes beyond the Twitter battles of today to really really give value to more principled matters, acting off of what is right for the country as opposed to necessarily what is just right for ourselves.
Good, man. You said you want to get another 250 years, man. I just want to get through this year. Man, your goals are lofty. So I hope we can keep up with the expectations here.
Well, the idea is based on studies of historical empires lasting about 250 years. And the U.S. in those terms is about that same age. So it's a good idea now to sort of go through this process to make sure that you can kind of rekindle that flame, was my thought.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, just if I can just go real quick, I guess is from a more conservative perspective. When anyone ever says grassroots, we're always like, oh, yay, grassroots stuff. Because that's like the only thing conservatives do. You think about the Tea Party movement, they're really, really good at getting the grassroots going. They get their people in, and then it's kind of like, okay, we just want to lower taxes and we stop there. So, hopefully a more successful follow through on a grassroots movement would be the ideal situation here. A lot of what we talk about is politics, but in reality, I think there's some way we need to take back culture more so than focus on the politics. To me, politics is always secondary. Through my conversation with you or Truman or anyone else, it's kind of, I try to look and focus on the more cultural aspect. I like to talk a lot about economics and all that, wonky, conservative, boring stuff just because I kind of have to. But in reality, it's all about culture and how it's going to affect our politics. And I know, I use the phrase a lot from Andrew Breitbart that politics is downstream from culture. And a lot of people look at that as if, politics cannot affect culture. I don't think that's what that means. It's like you can use your politics to affect culture, but you're swimming, upstream now. And a lot of the opposite effects are going to happen if you try to use politics as a weapon like that. So I don't like it when the right does it. I don't like it when the left does it. But I think to have a conversation like this with some people who are in tune with politics, but also, have their foot in the culture, I think is something that's going to be very important, because we need to figure out a way and I'm not even accusing you all of being right wing. I'm just saying you're not on the crazy left, and we need to figure out a way to have an interesting conversation that's, can be left of center, can be right of center, can be, on the crazy right. It's just, we have to have an interesting conversation, because I don't think often enough there's enough of those to kind of grab in, newer people who kind of are like at the fringes of politics. I mean, most people don't care about this stuff. Most people voted for Joe Biden because he's not Donald Trump, because they were told to not vote for Donald Trump. That's kind of how most people were. And to bring in people, a new generation of people who are like, okay, politics is kind of interesting. I got to know a little bit about it, but in reality, I need to understand the cultural effects that, our society bears is really what affects our politics, and to get people interested in that and kind of understand, what they're voting for, what they ought to vote for, what they ought to kind of hold secret, what, freedoms they want to maintain. That's the interesting conversation. And so that's kind of what I hope to accomplish here.
Yeah, I like that. That's why I was thinking that focusing on principles as opposed to necessarily policy would be kind of the way to approach this. This way, it's more of a focus on the socio-political as opposed to just the political.
For sure. Yeah.
Karlyn, do you have any thoughts?
I think that I'm always interested in participating in discussions where people are being rational and not hyperbolic, and and anytime we can escape from the hellscape that is Twitter, that is a good thing, which is of course why we all like locals so much. I think I'm really interested in how to. I think that we have an opportunity to bridge the gap between the populist right and the populist left. And this is something I want to have a conversation about. I think that this is something I've been vetting the last couple of days with people, frankly, on both sides, in terms of like, is there actually alignment between MAGA and BLM? And I'm not talking about BLM leadership. I'm talking about like average BLM people that just think that they're in it just to achieve the goal that they want, and they're not doing it for political reasons. And I think that I found a lot of people who are open to having a reasonable conversation like that, but it can't happen. Like those types of conversations can't happen on social media. They can't, because what happens is you find rational people that are trying to have the conversation and hash things out, and then what happens? But the idiots swoop in and they ruin the conversation for everyone else, and they just distract. And I'm talking about the idiots on both sides, and the right has the idiots and the left has the idiots. And I'm just not interested in having dialogue with people who are more interested in fighting than they are in actually solving problems and helping real people. And so something like this, which is about the dialogue, and I think we all come from very different perspectives. I think these things are important, and that's probably why I'm here.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I think that's really an important part of it, because forging those bonds between the populace on both sides is how you sort of maintain a nation. It's how you sort of find that sense of actual unity, unlike the political submission unity that we tend to see from the uniparty, as I like to put it.
Yeah. And I think 3 days into the Biden presidency, people are seeing very clearly that Biden isn't interested in helping them. Biden's going right back to what Obama did, literally right back to what Obama did. And they're already, I thought it was going to take much longer to wake people up, but Biden successfully did it in 3 days. So I think that there's already a recognition out there that it is no longer like Democrat versus Republican. It is us versus them.
Yeah, the fact that we're already having troops back in Syria, and that energy independence that we got actually started technically under Obama, I believe. Though I think the fruits of that sort of came out right around the time Trump was entering office. So it's kind of funny because he's also actually undoing part of Obama's legacy at the same time that he's by taking out the Keystone Pipeline. But again, we're not going to focus too much on the day-to-day politics. But I think there is a really good conversation to have here about bringing together these populist ideas. You being more of I would say you were more of a like centrist populist right now, more of a new right type of figure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Kevin, you already mentioned that you're more of a classic conservative. Truman, you feel like
what
you're
would you call it again? Is it the what's your name for it? The progressive traditionalist?
progressive
Nazi,
traditionalist is what I call
alt
myself.
right, far right, Nazi, white supremacist.
Okay, so Truman is the anomaly.
What? I thought that everyone who didn't agree with the mainstream narrative was a Nazi white supremacist. I mean,
Even if you're black.
even if you're black.
That's
Black
true.
is a political identity. It's not a race. They say you're skin folk, but not kinfolk if you don't agree with the prevailing narratives.
Multiracial whiteness.
That's right.
That
That's
actually
right.
has been going
And-
around lately.
Yep.
So
Internalized white supremacy and multiracial whiteness, because whiteness is also a political ideology.
yep. Yeah, apparently that's kind of the narrative that's being thrown around these days. So Truman, what about you? What are you thinking of getting out of this think tank group?
Explain some things about yourself without white splaining to the audience, please.
Everything I do is definitionally white splaining. But so here's a question. If you're just talking utter nonsense, is it not white splaining because it's just gibberish? So would it not be white splaining if you're just completely making moronic?
Well, you're also mansplaining too. Let's just be really clear. You are not only just white splaining, you are mansplaining.
You don't know how I identify at this very moment. All right, it changes from minute to minute. I'm a non-binary cup of tapioca pudding, so hear me roar.
Tasty.
We're proud people. What was your question again, James?
Just basically, what are you interested in getting out of this think tank? What kind of what made you think this was a good or useful idea, or maybe you don't, but you still want to be a part of it?
Well, when we first talked about it, first off, I didn't know we were going to be recording this, but that's all right. When we first talked about it, I mean, to be honest, a lot of the stuff you said, I didn't think sounded like a good idea, but I thought it was at least worth talking about. Have you heard the conversation when Eric Weinstein finally got on board with Brett's Unity 2020 campaign? What Eric's defense was?
No, I didn't hear about that.
So Eric's main point was that he'd rather be among the people trying to do something than the people who weren't, basically. That's pretty reductionist way of representing what he said, but I think you get the principle. So the idea is, one thing you said earlier, I think maybe that was Kevin actually, most people don't care about this stuff. Most people don't care about politics. And I don't think they should. I don't think people should have to care about this stuff. Politics is a niche interest, but now all of a sudden everyone has to have an opinion on it. And so people are going to have to care even if they don't want to, because they're being forced to care. They're being forced to take sides. So we just have a lot of layers of nested issues taking place right now. And so I would rather be, trying to do something than just completely being black-pilled about it, which is kind of, just like how I identify might change from day to day. Really how, optimistic or completely pessimistic I am about things definitely changes from day to day. So, I would rather be trying to do something to make things a little better, even if those are, even doomed to failure. I don't know. You're talking about the average lifespan of an empire being 250 years. I don't know where America's at in that, and I don't know what the likelihood of us lasting another 250 years is. I was talking to someone, I think this was maybe a year or two ago, and they were asking me about like something sustainability, like Social Security or something. They're like, what do you think is going to happen in like 10, 12 years? I'm like, dude, I'm worried more about like 10 to 12 months, man. What are you talking about? Like, I love the optimism. I love the optimism that you're thinking about 2030. Like, all right, that sounds nice. But anyway, and the thought that I had, and I'll leave it here, is, well, I'm giving a little bit of a spoiler for something that I wrote, but that's okay. We use a lot of the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. That's kind of a metaphor that's used a lot for, understanding, what's going on. If someone's red pilled, they kind of, that's used to describe a lot of different things. But I think mostly it's just realizing that your institutions suck. And, blue pilled is, staying in the, delusion.
Embracing it.
Yeah. And the picture you've been handed of reality. But I think there's another metaphor that gets lost, that's in the Matrix, in the third one, I think it is. And that's when,
why why I got lost. It's in the third one.
Dude, oh well, the third one is not good, but it does have this really interesting idea in it. And that is, I think it's the third one, when Neo finds out that he is actually the third one, like the third, chosen one. And that Zion and the machines basically exist in cycles. And so, the Zion will kind of populate and rise, and people will come out of the Matrix, and then they'll have a war with the machines, and then they'll lose, but a few are allowed to remain behind to kind of continue the cycle. And how there was something kind of embedded in the nature of their relationship, or in the human psyche, that made it inevitable that there would be a certain group of people that would come out of the Matrix, and then join Zion. But then, because of how the machines are, they would lose. And so, I've been thinking about that lately, and that idea of, if there is something embedded in liberalism and in our principles of this country that will naturally lead to it creating the mechanisms of its own demise. And if there is a kind of a cyclical, kind of the way Zion is, I'm not trying to say that America is, Zion, because if you're, familiar with any type of religious stuff, it's not a city on a hill. I don't think it is. I don't think it's the promised land, anything like that.
Yeah.
But, I think there could be something to that. And at the same time, I think one of the things that makes it beautiful is that it's like that. Like, if you were to change America and change the principles that allow for those really bad ideas to grow and to spread, then it wouldn't be America anymore. And this experiment wouldn't be this anymore. And so I guess the point I'm making is that even if, there is something to the fact that it's doomed to fail because of how successful it is, because of how good it is, because of how transcendent these ideas are, that doesn't mean that they're still not worth fighting for, because they're still the types of ideas that will flourish and will come back and, allow the same bad ideas in that, brought their demise. And so wherever we're at in that kind of hero's journey, I don't know. But I don't want the very obvious, at this point in time, the very obvious flaws in how our system can be gamed, lead us to a place where we abandon, kind of the beauty and the genius of that system and those things that created that in the first place. Which, it kind of sucks, but, I think I'm okay with that. So anyway, my point is that I still think these things are worth fighting for. And we've got a lot of challenges, perhaps insurmountable challenges. But, we still have to say that we tried our best, and that we fought for what was right, and whatever helps us get to sleep at night. And, maybe we win. I don't know. I don't know where we're at there, but it's still worth doing, right? I mean, you get one life. Would you rather spend it, being apathetic and saying F it, or, at least trying to use it for something good and meaningful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I really appreciate that that message. I think it's good that we do use our lives to do something, essentially. But Kevin, you were gonna say something?
Well, I think like the point, I always hear people being like, well, okay, this American experiment's going to fail eventually. It's like nothing lives forever, kind of that idea that a lot of people bought into that. And they're like, all right, well, let's kill it off now and restart. I think that's what a lot of people are trying to look at this as. It's like a growing forest eventually needs a forest fire to kind of reset, right? Whereas what we should be looking at is not just, a person lives, a person dies. If you look at it just from the singular individual perspective, yeah, that happens. But, humanity is supposed to live on. Humanity is supposed to evolve. So while people are focused on the death, of some of these ideas and principles and trying to transcend them effectively, we should be looking how to evolve, how to define different ways to maintain our principles and not abandon them, but still keep moving forward with humanity. An example of this is something like climate change. Climate change, you can say whatever you want about it. It's just this evil sun monster, or you can say, okay, well, if climate's changing, we should try to do our best to make sure, we mitigate these changes or, help, people survive these changes. And you have a certain section of the right that's just like, no, we're just going to pretend it's not real. And then you have a certain section of the left or the right where, the right kind of comes from the conservative, conservation type of mentality where they used to care about the environment. And now it's kind of just because the left right thing, I think they're abandoning it. But, I think it's stupid for the right to just ignore it. But I think the right decision is like, we don't want the government to control, what we ought to do to make sure we fight back against climate change. But, the people who are just outright rejecting it and just saying, it's not even happening. That's not the way to do it either. I mean, that's a way to go to death eventually, rather than maintain your principles, make sure you can maintain your own rights to live the way you want to. Do not give all of this false sense of safety bought from the government. Don't go down that route, but still, worry about the environment. Like try to give to causes that, help recycling or, there's a lot of different ways that you can still fight back against climate change without saying, government, please do the job for me. I'll relinquish some of my rights. So as long as you fight climate change for me, that's just a way to die. So maintain your principles, but still fight against, any new, threats to humanity that come across. I think that's the smartest way to do it rather than just picking one side or the other. It's either give everything to the government to fight against climate change or deny climate change is real and just, maintain your current lifestyle and don't worry about it. Just let the next generation worry about it.
And I think this is a bit important with what you were talking about before about the politics and culture, because and also what Truman was saying, how he hates how everything is becoming political. And a lot of the reason is because we end up throwing a lot of these principles back into the politics. We end up throwing managing the climate and our environment back to the government rather than managing our own local grounds, we're not managing our
locus
own
of
spaces.
Responsibility.
Thank
locus
you.
Of control.
Authority of control. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. But yeah, so we're not really, as time goes on, we naturally sort of cede more without ever taking anything back. And I feel like that can be one of the principal ideas we discuss in the future, that in order to give more to the government, there must be some stuff taken back. In order to give more control, I think this could be like a constitutional type of idea, that for the government to take more control over one thing, it needs to cede control over another thing.
Well, so the problem is that principles have lost like front-facing utility. And what I mean is that principles are the most important thing, I think. Being principled, being grounded in, transcendent ideas and ideals. And this is something I think I talked about maybe in December. I might've been with Bentham. I don't know, might've been you, I don't know. But they've lost their utility, like their obvious utility. So take, for example, if you were a person in America in, let's say, even like 1900, your ability to forge like a life for yourself was virtually entirely dependent on your own action and your own initiative. And so the degree in which you were stifled in the use of your freedom was the degree in which you were limited in your ability to, grab life by the reins and do something for yourself and make something for yourself. you know, provided you weren't part of some like wealthy family or something. But now, you know, how much, well, and so to put a fine point on that, you saw a direct relationship between your own freedom and your own agency and your own liberty and your outcomes in life. And so if you were stifled in the exercise of your freedom, you were stifled in your ability to succeed in life. Whereas now, we don't see that. People don't see a relationship between their own freedom and their own liberty. And, you know, therefore the idea of freedom and the idea of liberty and their ability to succeed. You know, if you grow up, so take me, dude, I grew up in a small town, I was super poor. But I still like had basically everything taken care of. You know, my life script, as it were, was kind of put out there for me. And that's like a lot of people, you know, my age, you know, in this, you know, it was, you're going to go to college, you're not going to go work at the plant, and then you're going to get a pre-approved degree, and then you go to a city where you live in an apartment. I mean, you've heard me make this spiel before, but the point is that people do, you know, have kind of a script put in front of them, and they don't see a connection between the freedom as an idea or liberty as an idea and their ability to succeed in life, because they can follow this script, go to school and half-ass it because the standards are super low, go to college and get in a bunch of debt, you know, whatever, and then go and get some, you know, one of those degrees that someone tells them to, and then go to the city, you know, based on the internship connections, live in an apartment where everything's taken care of for them. And they don't ever look at freedom or liberty in relationship to how they succeeded. And so my point is that freedom is necessary for those things. Someone else's exercise of liberty, of freedom, of ingenuity, of, you know, letting people, or, you know, having the ability to pursue their own, you know, things, whether it's the person who built the building they lived in or built the institution they got their degree from, whatever. Liberty did play a role. People exercising liberty did play a role in their success, but not their own, to the, you know, that they're aware of. And so, you know, whenever you're talking about, there needs to be this, you know, for whatever the government takes, you know, we need to take something back. Well, I think that's right, but there's all these things that are like true, but they need to be rebranded. People need to have an understanding of these concepts. Like, it's not working. Like when I see that Thomas Sowell sign on Kevin's wall, which is of course amazing, you know, I think about, okay, so you can go back and look at Sowell doing interviews in the 70s talking about why the gender wage gap is nonsense. Okay, that's 50 years ago, but that's still prevailing, you know, talking points among politicians. He would make the same arguments. Milton Friedman would do this. You can find these interviews in the 70s and 60s about minimum wage laws and unions. Like, these ideas have been out there. Read Hayek. You know, go back, you know, even farther, read Nietzsche, you know, the ideas of what happens when collectivism, you know, is allowed to run rampant, or things just about human nature. You know, Nietzsche, if we'll have to build a God, we'll have to become gods if we destroy God, you know, it'll fill a gap. We're going to make a gap that'll have to be filled by man. You know, hopefully we can live up to the task. Like the ideas that our society, you know, rises and falls on, have been around for a while, but there's a packaging problem. There's, you know, the marketplace of ideas can only exist if there isn't a monopoly. So the marketplace of ideas right now is not a free market. It's not an open market. And so that for people don't have that idea that they need to take some of their liberty back. They just want to give it to the government because it doesn't, you know, as you talked about in that video that you made a while back, James, it doesn't have as much purchasing power in their mind. And so they're more than happy to trade it for temporary safety. And the idea is that, you know, tell them how wrong they are and, you know, are being stifled and have been for a long time. Again, Sowell's been saying the same thing for so long. And people like Friedman, you know, Solzhenitsyn, all of these ideas are out there. So I think the bigger issue is how do we get people, one, to be exposed to the ideas, and two, to care. That's the other thing, is people don't care. People don't care because people are more likely to choose something that's easy and comfortable than they are to choose something that's difficult, I think, most times. And so you have these layers of issues of how do you fight human nature? You know, how do you fight like this, the gin, as Eric Weinstein would talk, the gated institutional narrative, that has these accepted ideas that keeps out the ideas that are correct, but don't get sunlight. So anyway, there's a lot there, but do you see what I'm saying? I think there's a bigger issue of just how society conceptualizes these things in the first place that has to be addressed.
Yeah, but what's the best way? And I don't mean to hijack the conversation and just keep talking, but like what's the most productive way to teach principles into human beings? Like you said, you can tell them about the wage gap and list out a whole bunch of facts as to why it's not true. And that's the conservative mentality. And that's the way, when I started doing stuff, I just listed out facts and like, why aren't people listening to this? This makes sense because it's not compelling. The best way to teach principles, and a book that got this right is a book called The Bible, is through stories. And this is a big reason you want to take back the culture and there's a slow evolution happening. The reason why an individual YouTuber like Karlyn can get more traffic than CNN is because it's evolving. Like that medium's starting to die. I mean, they're holding on for dear life. They're trying to create a monopoly, but they're slowly dying. The reason why movies have been trending downward is because more interesting storytelling has been in TV, longer formats, more episodes. Now that's slowly dying. Now you see independent YouTubers creating their own like sub movies. Like this thing is evolving in terms of storytelling. And I think what you need to do is, if you want to teach these principles, you have to figure out a way how to tell it in a story. And that's going to be the hard part. But that is kind of how you got to really move these principles forward. Is you can't do the traditional, I'm going to list out a bunch of facts and expect people, I can't write a paper on this thing. No one's going to read it. Too long didn't read is kind of the trending for any paper that takes you more than 5 minutes to read. It is some sort of, now we're seeing it in YouTube medium or podcasting. People will listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast. Like that is a way to tell an interesting story, get a lot of facts and information out there that people are actually going to listen to. I mean, how much of the Joe Rogan audience cares about politics? Probably none of them, but he's got a lot of political people on there because the people who aren't interested are interested in the story. They're not interested in just you blurting out your principles and these facts and figures. We got to figure out a way to make this compelling to your average person. And that's really kind of the hurdle you got to get through. And I think some people are very successful at it. And you can see the traditional lines of storytelling, because really CNN isn't news telling, it's storytelling. It's not very good. And that's the reason why they're not that good. But they're trying to hold on for dear life as all these other smaller creators are taking their audience away from them.
Well, I mean, and I want to build on that too, because I agree with pretty much everything Kevin just said. And I also think, there's the other reason that CNN and the media like it are losing their audience is because no one trusts them. No one trusts them. Their trust has tanked. They had one job, and that was to tell the truth. And now people are realizing that they're not doing it, that they are storytelling exactly like you said. And people want to be told the truth. They want that authenticity. They don't want to be fed a bill of goods. But I think where the right really struggles is in the storytelling piece, is it embracing that they actually do need to connect with people's emotions in order to get them to learn. That is how people make decisions. That is how our brain is wired. And from the minute that I left the left, all I've heard about is, Karlyn, the right makes decisions from logic, the left makes decisions from reason. And that is simply not true. Or the left makes decisions from emotions, rather. Sorry. And that's simply not true. It is just not true. And I think that the right does itself a disservice in teaching more conservative values and teaching why these things are important when they don't embrace that they will get more traction if they appeal to human emotion. And I also think that the right does a really great job of suppressing their emotions, because listen, the only way that you can really make someone feel something, like the Bible, for instance, it's a really good example, and even good example for like non-Christians like me. The only way that you can make someone feel something in a story is if you feel it yourself in the writing of that story. If you do not feel it, if you're just writing a boring paper, even though it might just take 5 minutes to read, but if you aren't putting any emotion into that paper, if you don't feel it yourself, your reader is not going to feel it, and that's why they don't want to read it. That's why someone will sit down and watch a 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, because they're like, Joe Rogan feels what he's saying. right? The guests feel what they're saying and the audience can pick up on that. But a lot of times when this is articulated, especially in print, that emotion piece gets taken away. And I really think it's because a lot of people on the right have bought into this idea of, we don't make decisions based on emotions. We make decisions based on logic. Well, you can use logic to back up what you want to do. That's all fine, well, and good, and you should. But don't do it at the cost of emotion, because you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there, two things on that. One, I'm not sure. So I think that there's a certain contingent of people. I'll put it this way: when it comes to the CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, viewership, I'm not sure how many people they have left that are watching them that are primarily interested in truth. So what I mean is that there is in a demographic, there's going to be some people who think they're getting truth, and whenever they realize that's not what they're getting, then they'll migrate to other things. So that's kind of who you guys address there, people who are kind of waking up to stuff. At the same time, there's an increasingly larger number of people who are more interested in having their biases confirmed. So if you look at Pew Research stuff, I think it's something like 20% of people say they get the majority of their news from like social media, from their Facebook and their Twitter, which is their own echo chamber that they curate. There's about another 18 to 20% of people on each side that exclusively get their news from Fox News and exclusively get their news from MSNBC. So that's among people that would get news. That's 60% right there, just under, that will get it from an echo chamber, from something that will confirm what they think. And I think the number of people that are looking for that is increasing. Here's how a litmus test you can use is look at any time CNN did tweet out something negative, or like a story that wasn't, just ass kissing Joe Biden. And all the replies would be, oh, what about Trump? Why are you talking about this? What is wrong? All this other stuff. And so it wasn't people who were having honest conversations. And again, this is Twitter, so it's thin slicing. But my point is I don't know how many people are left that are getting their information from those things that are primarily interested in truth. So, but that's another thing. That's that human nature thing. But the deeper thing that I want to address, what you guys said there about how the right doesn't talk about emotion or tap into that. I mean, that was the first big post I made on Dave Rubin's Locals when he launched it, like a little under a year and a half ago, was talking about Ben Shapiro's "Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings" and what an awful slogan that is. I guarantee that slogan has changed no one's mind. No one, not one person, had their mind changed from that slogan. And so you're absolutely right. And there's another issue where it's not just that they'll make that claim about emotion and logic, and which I think is also, it's just nonsense because there's a lot of emotion on the right. But, there is something I wanted to do a video about this, but I haven't really been able to refine this thought. But at one point this last summer during the BLM riots after the George Floyd stuff, I wrestled with the idea of condemning entirely the notion of the simmering frustration and anger that was out there. And, I think this was also Eric Weinstein. He made a video about how, he was condemning violence, but he said, it's good for the government to be reminded who they answer to. It's good for these people to be reminded who they answer to. And there's all these things that these talking points on the left that I disagree with their conclusion and their solution to things, but I don't disagree with the fact that there's a problem. And so I honestly had, whenever this stuff happened at the Capitol, this is the thing I want to make a video on, but I just need to kind of refine this thought. But I had the same thought whenever I was watching some footage from the BLM stuff this summer that I had whenever I had that same feeling whenever I was watching some stuff from the Capitol. And the feeling was, people are pissed and they have good reason to be pissed. And, Kevin, to your point about the BLM and the MAGA, actually that was, I think, Karlyn, you said that, there is a lot of frustration out there that does need to be addressed, and the right doesn't address it. So they'll say, you're a dumbass for going to college and getting a degree that you shouldn't, that you can't use, and took all this debt. That's not an answer to a student loan problem. Okay. It's still a problem. That's not an answer. It's saying that cops aren't disproportionately racist isn't an answer to the fact that the war on drugs did negatively impact the Black community. Okay, yeah. Were there a lot of Black leaders and the Black caucus on board with that? Yes. Okay, yes. That's fine. But it did have that impact. Okay. And so, but not just on Black community, on poor people, disproportionate. I mean, I experienced that in my white trash town. A cop would say that he smelled weed and use it as an excuse to search your car. I never smoked anything in my life, but I had a cop say that to me multiple times. I'm like, dude, you're full of shit. I don't smoke weed. No one smokes in my vehicle. Like, you know, and so there are these issues that have to be addressed that aren't getting addressed in the proper way. The only people speaking to them are the ones who have the most batshit crazy ideas about what to do with them. You know, minimum wage laws. Let's make it $15 an hour. Well, no, minimum wage laws hurt the people you're trying to help. Okay, that's true, but we still have to address economic issues in this country that are deeper than the minimum wage can solve in the first place. But there's only one side that's addressing it. And the last thing I'll say is I was watching this interview that Brett Weinstein did with a guy who was at the Capitol, and the guy was talking about how that, you know, just he was inside there. He's a reporter, and he said that there was some guy who was, you know, wearing an American flag cape, had the scraggly beard, and he found the reporter guy that Brett was interviewing, and he asked him, he said, are you live streaming or are you recording? And the guy was the reporter dude was kind of freaking out because he was used to doing Antifa, recording stuff at Antifa. And if they find out you're recording, they'll break your phone and bust your face. But this dude, the American flag cape guy, wasn't like that. He's like, come with me, you know, if you want to see history. So he takes them to where there's these people like kind of trashing these offices, but they're also being careful not to like damage the walls, I guess. I don't know. But the point that like really resonated with me, and I know this is a super silly thing and I'm totally cool with it, but he said at one point that dude with the flag cape and the beard was kind of rallying these people to kind of charge into that inner area. What's it called again? I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on that.
Is it when they went into the Senate?
Yeah, but that area, it's I forgot what that's called, the rotunda maybe. But he said that the dude with the beard and the American flag cape turned and looked at the crowd, people behind him, and he quoted Creedence Clearwater Revival, and he said, "It ain't me, I ain't Joe Biden's son." And then he led a charge into the rotunda. And I know that's silly and it kind of speaks to the performative nature of what happened there. But if you know the song Fortunate Son by CCR, it's all about the divide that happened during the Vietnam War between the elites who could get out of sending their kids to war and the people who were forced and drafted to be sent to war. So, you know, the song is, I ain't a fortunate son. I ain't no senator's son. I ain't no millionaire's son. And so that guy was speaking to that. I ain't Joe Biden's son. And so there is this gap that is increasing between the elites who run the institutions and those who get to control the narrative, and those who are just being force-fed horseshit and being told to go along with these things. And that's that gap. And it's creating more and more frustrations in our society. But to what you guys were saying, the right doesn't give answers to it. They don't have thought leaders. I think I said that maybe in a conversation, Karlyn, in one of your things the other day. The right doesn't have thought leaders who are actually answering these things and saying, yes, let's talk about student loans. Yes, let's talk about higher education. Yes, let's talk about the failure of localism and the de-emphasizing of local government. Let's talk about all these things. And so they're making it where the only answers are crazy ones. Anyway, okay, sorry, I just droned on for a while. But
no, it's good.
I agree with everything. Truman, and I just want to really emphasize one of the points you made, because this was something I was actually thinking while I was standing on the Capitol lawn watching this mass of people. And you know, I'll say it because it's recorded, but you guys know it already. Like, I didn't go in the Capitol. I don't condone like the violence from the Capitol, all that stuff. But when I remember when I was standing there, I was looking over this mass of people and they were chanting, "Our house, our house, our house." And the media has portrayed that as like, that was a sign of sedition that they were chanting "our house." And I remember thinking, like, that is their house. And that literally is their house. We all pay for every single thing in that house. They're 100% correct. And what you said is like, sometimes the government needs to be reminded who they answer to. That was my exact thought when I was watching the tens of thousands of people there, like being very peaceful and just standing outside and waving their flags and chanting. And a lot of people have asked me since then, they're like, well, Karlyn, what does 1776 mean then? Because that obviously means a violent overthrow of a government. I'm like, no. That's not what most of them were doing. Most of them were reminding them who they answer to.
Exactly. It's about the people. It's not about whatever kind of power they want to get.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Truman, there's been an evolution, I think, in truth, the way we look at truth. There is such a thing as objective truth. And some people, get that. I think the traditional liberals are like, yes, we fight for objective truth all the time. Um, there has been a movement lately because when we go back to, people like CNN losing audience, and, you said it's like people aren't even searching for truth anymore. There's been, I would say, relatively new, this evolution of my truth, right? Which is one of my most hated statements of all time. I hate that when, it's my truth. It's like, what does that mean? It's by definition, that's an oxymoron. It's not truth if it's your truth, right? But because people are believing that, so they're trying to create some sort of truth, and they do it on the left, they do it on the right. I think a lot of the people who charged into the Capitol kind of had their truth going on, kind of thing. But it's how you can, how CNN can still kind of have that following, because the thing with story, a compelling story has to have some sort of truth. I mean, Game of Thrones, there's nothing true about that, but it's because of the relationships between the characters is why it's believable. That's why it's entertaining, because you can believe that this relationship is possible given the circumstances. The further away any story gets to some sort of truth, the less believable it gets, the less compelling it gets to the human condition, right? And, CNN drifted away from that, but I think they're trying to play on the your truth kind of thing. I'm not saying it's just CNN or the left. Again, they have a bunch of people on the right that's playing off of the your truth, what you ought to believe in. And a lot of it is saying, they're trying to throw intentions onto the opposite side, trying to say they're trying to get you. Because just like I remember them saying, our house, like Karlyn, like you said, everyone was like, well, this is obviously white supremacy, like the white supremacy. I mean, the white supremacist label that they threw onto that is amazing to me. And as to how anyone can believe that is like incredible, because you can't just keep throwing, this label on everything. And now it's every single time it's get less and less compelling. You can call your best friend a Nazi and they're just going to like brush it off because it doesn't mean anything anymore. You took the truth out of it. Right. So now, there's a lot of the my truth going on, trying to convey this and make it a more compelling story. And I think, the important thing is, and I know Truman and I talked about this, kind of, push the kids to the kids table. Let's have the adults talk, right? Because if you're going to act like a child about it, like, all right, you're not serious about this conversation, let's have this, real conversation. Because like something that Karlyn said earlier, finding the rational people on both sides, we can definitely do that. And it's kind of funny, the Truman, the story you brought up, because I was just about to mention, I'm in the middle of my review of Michelle Alexander's what is it called, the new Jim Crow, and I just went through the second chapter that has a whole bunch of stuff in there I agree with, and it actually goes over that exact same thing, how the right stands up for all of these your liberties, but they're okay with trampling on the Fourth Amendment. The search and seizure. It's like, well, they're just gonna let the police search you because they think fighting for justice, or looking like they're fighting for justice, is going to be a more compelling story to the people who vote them into office. And it's just, even taking it from someone, Michelle Alexander, who I guarantee you I disagree with her on a whole bunch of stuff. It was good to have that chapter to be like, okay, like I have common ground with you now. It's like, even though you and I are on the exact opposite sides of most things, you and I can agree on this. And the thing I was kind of scared of is like, okay, I'm going to write a review that I'm like, okay, I agree with just about everything. Like no one's going to read it, because who the heck cares about me agreeing with someone on the opposite side of me, right? Yep. But you go in someone like Locals, surprisingly, there's a lot of rational people there, right? A lot of people there who just want information, want a compelling story. And, I kind of pretty up the reviews a little bit, kind of make them funny when I can. But I was surprised that I got just the same feedback that I was getting in the other ones. People are like, okay, it's kind of cool that the war on drugs, that's a big one that we complain with on the right. The war on poverty was started when poverty was trending downward. Why would you start a war on it? And now you just reverse the trend. Same thing with the war on drugs. The drug usage, illegal drug usage in the United States was trending downward. You start the war on drugs, and that is trying to use politics to force a change on the culture, and you get the exact opposite effect. And it happens to the right and left, and we got to learn how to tell a compelling story and push the kids to the kids table and let the adults talk.
Can I ask a question to you guys? Just a quick poll here based on what you said about truth. Okay, I'm going to ask. Here's a question. So I'm thinking again about utility and value. I guess maybe those are the same thing, or at least a very large concentric circle between the two. But let's talk about so I mentioned the utility of at least principle in a way that's front facing, conscious. What about the utility of truth? So I'll give you a few examples and you tell me where. So falsehoods, there's that saying, reality bats last. And falsehoods are only damaging to the degree that they run into reality and you face like a negative consequence for acting or believing falsely, correct? So if I believe that the speed limit out here on this road is 65 miles an hour and I'm driving 65 up it, the fact that I'm believing something that's not true will run into reality when I get in a car wreck or I hurt somebody or a cop pulls me over or something, or I lose my license. Okay. So let's take the framework of, if we agree that falsehoods are harmful to the degree in which they create friction when they hit reality and, you kind of hit that brick wall. So where is the harm? When does it kick in for the people who are purveying falsehoods about, let's take George Floyd's death. Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd. George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose. They sat on the body cam footage, which is absolutely heartbreaking to watch. It's really difficult because it's going to happen. He's dying. But he didn't kill him. Where is but anyone right now in society, you actually are rewarded for forwarding the falsehood. Now, I'm not saying there isn't harm. There is harm, but the harm, let's take a Thomas Sowell principle. The closer someone is to the consequences of their actions, the more adaptive they are to if they're wrong, if they do something wrong. That's why localism is, supposed to be the best way of doing things, because the person who is closest to the consequences of their decision is most likely to adapt and try to make a better decision. So I'm not saying there isn't harm, but right now you are rewarded. That harm is kind of diffused into society and how it affects the social fabric by forwarding a falsehood about George Floyd. We can take the same thing about Russiagate, right? That there was harm that was done from forwarding that falsehood, but none of the people who were forwarding it, paid a penalty for that. One of the things that Taibbi writes about in Hate Incorporated is you can be wrong, and not just a little wrong, like extremely wrong on every issue, as long as you're wrong in the same way that the other people on your team are wrong, and you're all wrong in the same way, and you can make an entire career about being wrong. So the question I have for you guys is, if you were to look at prevailing narratives in society right now, things that are accepted, things that are literally fueling institutional change, fueling people's worldview, how much of it is a lie and how much of it is true? And then look at if a person were to just live their life. So if I were to just live my life, go, get a job in corporate or something, and I'm going along with all the prevailing societal narratives that are false, like definitionally false, I'm going to be more likely to succeed than if I say what's true. So we have this weird paradox where it seems like truth is running into the issue that lies should be running into. When, lies hit reality and you face consequences for it and you adjust to do what's true. But right now, if you say what's true, you're penalized socially, you're penalized, relationally, and, maybe even financially in your workplace. And you're incentivized to adapt not to what's true, but to what's false. You see what I'm saying? So how do we get so my question is, one, is that correct? And two, what do you do about that to where, you're saying my truth, I hate this. I agree. But right now it feels like truth is not nearly as useful to orient yourself in your day-to-day life as lies, because the damage that they're doing is kind of diffused out into society. It's not as much on the personal level as it should be. And so people are incentivized to adapt and incorporate lies into their life as opposed to truth. Does that make sense? They're not rewarded for seeking truth.
I agree with that. And I don't know the solution to that, but I want to provide another example of that happening, because this was literally a conversation I had the other day with a BLM activist of all people, where he was talking about like, well, why didn't Trump do more with COVID? Why didn't Trump do more? Why didn't Trump do more? And I said, let me bring you back to when Trump came out at one of his press conferences and said, well, hydroxychloroquine might work, and I have a lot of confidence in it. And the media immediately jumped on him and made hydroxychloroquine, which is a perfectly safe drug for most people out there, immediately made it the worst possible thing that has ever happened. Doctors who are treating patients came out and said, I'm having a lot of success treating my patients with hydroxychloroquine and zinc, and they were blacklisted. Videos of them talking about it were banned off the internet. Their reputations were destroyed. Well, what happened right after the election? The CDC came out and said, oh, P.S., hydroxychloroquine is a really safe drug. Never mind, psych. And so, I mean, that is another specific example of the time when doctors were literally incentivized to not give what could be life-saving treatment at a very, very cheap cost to their patients, because if they said that they could be blacklisted, ostracized, their reputations destroyed, all these things. And that is a very, I mean, George Floyd is one person. And I was actually thinking about George Floyd this morning, and I was thinking like, what if, because it's my recollection, and Lord knows 2020 was the longest year in history, and so this might not be the correct recollection because it was a long time ago, but it's my recollection that at one point George Floyd was in the back of the police car, and they actually took him out and put him on the ground.
He asked
What if they
to
had
be
just
removed
left
from the
him
car. Yeah, he asked to be
what if
removed.
the police
Right.
just said, no, you're staying in the car. You are in the car. You are secure. You're fine. What if they had just left him in the car, and then he has his fentanyl overdose in the backseat of the car when they're not doing anything? I mean, would that have actually changed anything? I'm not entirely sure it would, because then the argument would be, well, why didn't you know he was having a fentanyl overdose? But I mean, like, I agree with you that, not adhering to what is being incentivized is adhering to the narrative that is popular, not
Yep.
the narrative that is correct.
Yeah, the tribal narrative, and whatever position your side takes is more important than, is it a good idea? Is it a useful idea? Is it effective or true? Is it true? That's that John Haidt thing. People ask, they don't ask, is it true? They ask, do I have to believe it? Or they'll say, must I believe it? Or can I believe it? As opposed to, is it true? About ideas. Whenever there was the abolish the police thing that came out, I immediately was like, I know the people who are I have the names in my head, who they're going to key in that's their side's thing. And they're just going to start, steel manning this thing and, not ask, hey, is this a good thing to talk about? And it happens on the other side too. So the right did that with hydroxychloroquine. The right did that with masks, and so they just key in. So they take any proposition and say, is this a thing that is this my side's thing or the other side's thing? And they act according to that, not, is it true? Is it right? Is it useful? You know what I mean? So, I guess, same thing. I mean, what do we do about that incentive structure? It's perverse.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that maybe doesn't make sense to you guys, but it does to me. There's a older YouTube clip of Eric Weinstein where he goes through kind of the subjective truth, but he kind of breaks it down in a religious aspect. He says that the Bible is full of metaphorical truths, and the example he uses for it is a porcupine throwing its quills. Like a lot of people, like a lot of cultures, taught kids that porcupines can throw their quills. Porcupines cannot do that. But they taught them that, so they kept their distance away from it so they wouldn't be close to the quills, right? So it's not explicitly true, but it's there to teach a lesson. He argues you can find a lot of that in religion. And I would argue kind of this left mentality that we see right now is a religion, right? So I think they're dealing a lot with metaphorical truths, right? George Floyd incident. Did the cop kill him? Doesn't seem so. But does that truth matter, or does the metaphorical truth, the meaning behind it, matter more? Right? They're dealing more in the metaphorical than in the reality. You see this a lot, especially when it comes to some sort of shooting that, looked bad in the initial taping, but after a while they're like, oh, the guy had a gun and shot him. And the response from the left, who kind of stood up for, the bad cop, good good perpetrator is always like, okay, well, maybe this instance isn't true, but we know this fits a certain pattern that we've seen in the past. It's the metaphorical truth is the important, not the actual explicit truth. And I think we see now this kind of more subjective truth just has more social capital than objective truth has right now. And we need to figure out a way to flip that around. How, like, what will make truth matter again? You know, that should have been I don't know if it worked well for Trump because CNN would turn it around for him, but
Yeah.
make truth matter again, or make truth great again. You know, so it's something the culture has lost, and it doesn't deal with the same social capital as being on your side. And I do think it's interesting, you know, how you brought up Thomas Sowell. The closer you are to the actual situation, the more accountable you have to hold yourself to be, right? You know, it's always about, you've seen a lot of politicians stand for something until the thing's really close. You've seen politicians on the right stand against abortion until, you know, their mistress gets pregnant. And then it's like, oh, and I'm really accountable now. You know, am I going to hold up to my principles, or am I going to just kind of take the easy out? And, you know, I think we see a lot of that. I think it comes down to just pushing off accountability. I don't think we have a culture that is really big on accountability. I mean, you saw a pretty good movie, Hillbilly Elegy, on Netflix, which is a good book. People hated it because it taught accountability. I mean, that's a perfect example of, you know, someone trying to get in the culture, a guy who's not even super right wing. I think I've heard him interviewed, but you know, and it was hated because they're like, oh, this teaches accountability. We can't have that. There's way too many people. When we learn about this victim mentality, and I had it one of my last reviews, that we look at the victim so much. You can even see this in the new movies. A lot of the even the new superhero movies, they focus on the backstory of the bad guy so much because there is no bad guy that you should not feel bad for. Like, all of them, you must feel bad for them. So they always build up this backstory, where there's a lot of better movies. I know the one movie that the Daily Wire distributed, they like made it a certain point to say, okay, these are kids doing a bad thing. We don't care about their bad backstory, because if we just care about that, we don't care about the people actually defending life, the people doing the good thing, the protagonists. And so, you know, I think we have such a victim mentality in our current society that, you know, we're going to take the victim, or we're going to take the perpetrator side before we take the victim side. And it just makes it easier to forward that narrative. I don't know if any of that made sense, but
a victim and perpetrator, it doesn't fall within the rubric of reality, right? Because there's a lot of people who have, take, for example, let's just take David Dorn. David Dorn, his death wasn't convenient to the narrative. He was a victim, but it's irrelevant. And then the Trump supporter that got killed in, was that Portland or Seattle? One of those two. That's a victim.
But the perpetrator is victimized first.
He's a perpetrator.
Right.
So,
but the perpetrator in those cases were victimized first in some way. Either they're
right,
standing
all
up
I'm
for the
saying
victimized.
is
So
that even the concept of what defines a victim and what defines a perpetrator, which is often they use this concept of power, and even the concept of power isn't used accurately anymore because they have the power. The left has all the power. This is the point that I am really, you know, kind of hovering on mentally right now, is that anyone who thinks that they can sit this thing out now is fooling themselves. And it sucks because people shouldn't have to do this. There's more important things in life than dealing with this cultural nonsense. But we have to, what is this? My alarm? I don't know what that is. Anyway, but like, we have to make converts away. We have to peel people back from like these narratives that they're incentivized to buy into. So the incentive structure has to be addressed. Like, the courage deficit has to be addressed, like all of these things. But, you know, there is no sitting this out anymore, unfortunately.
Well, I want to jump in here too, though, because I think that, you know, Kevin's point is well made about, like, you know, that was something I actually didn't think about in regards to the Daily Wire movie, which I thought was actually like a really good movie. And maybe I was just enjoying the fact that I could watch a movie for once and have it have a good story and not be. And it was, but anyway, you know, I think that not focusing on the backstory of the perpetrator is important, but I also think it's important to say that for most average people on the left, most average people on the left don't have power. It's the leaders that have the power. And for like just the average everyday person who buys into this stuff, and I'll go back to the BLM example, like they're not necessarily in as powerful position as like the leadership of BLM, or they might not even understand what the leadership of BLM is doing. And I have to see them as victims as well, because they're being lied to as well. They're being lied to by the media every day. They're either being lied to overtly, or they're being lied to by how much information the media is omitting from what they're actually reporting. And that is just as much a victim as anything else, right? And I'll give you one concrete example. I had a 3-hour conversation the other day with a BLM activist. He had no idea what Hunter Biden's laptop was. He had no idea about the fact that hydroxychloroquine actually works according now to the CDC. He had no idea of most of the stuff that I think all of us on this call know about, because we're very, very high information people. But most people out there do not live and breathe this stuff every single day like we do. They look to their sources to tell them the truth, so they can just go about their day and go to their job, and maybe they go to a protest on the weekend if they feel really strongly about something, but they're not in it all day every day. And I don't necessarily think that the requirement to be in the conversation should be that you spend every waking hour thinking about the news and politics and culture. That is a high bar for everyone. So I'm going to say that, just average everyday people, they're just as much a victim in this as people who are being, I'll use one of their words, oppressed by the media and by the people who are actually in power.
Yeah,
it's a reality distortion that people are in, and there is no incentive to try and get out of it, because their life is they see what happens. Like what happened with Ellen saying a good thing about George Bush was an example. They use those things to set examples. Every once in a while, think about in medieval times. It's not necessarily that they like cutting off people's hands or putting them in the stocks and throwing tomatoes at them, but they know if they do that every now and again, it'll keep everyone else in line. And so people are incentivized to remain in these reality distortions because they see the examples of how quickly their lives will be ruined if they step out of bounds. And people shouldn't have to deal with this. That's my point, is it sucks. This is the worst thing. Like, I hate politics so much, but there isn't an option to opt out right now, unfortunately. And that's for like everyone. And like you're saying, Karlyn, that's the thing, is that people, there's so many layers, because they're not incentivized. So they are being lied to. It's not necessarily their fault. They're also not incentivized to seek truth. And they see what happens to people that do. So there's all these layers of the issues of the ways in which this reality distortion is reinforced. Then it's only going to get worse. The Soul does a good job talking about age as a factor in different economic things. And so the idea of time and the way time impacts things is something that we don't always key into, but every single year, another generation of voters graduates high school. And so every single year we are seeing a literal increase in the population that believes things that are definitionally false, being taught things that are definitionally false. So every year that we continue to lose the war for truth and for reality is another year it's going to get harder and harder and harder to win, because the amount of just sheer numbers of people are going to, for the love, anyway, the amount of people is going to increase.
Yeah.
But that's it. I lost my train of thought. It's
okay. But yeah, I mean, well, there's this whole issue also of just perspective. I think I think that's a real key to this, is that people are kind of confusing and replacing perspective with truth. Like whenever I've faced anyone who says, this is the truth, or this is my truth, or this is what I know, and I say, no, that's your perspective of what you know. That's typically my response. And it's a way to say, you don't have all the information. And a lot of the times that can key people in, and it can make them have a second thought. And when I do that, I find that that's a very good way to get people more invested into being like, maybe I don't know everything about this. It sometimes can trigger people to want to look more into it, depending on how invested they are. But I also think it's not necessarily essential that everyone be hyper invested like this. I don't think it's essential for everyone to be hyper invested in politics. The problem is that people just don't have any sort of, things have become so kind of tense that there's not really a way to find a single solid place of trust right now. And there's some amount of that in the independent media. That's why independent voices are flourishing so much right now. And it's really crushing these other old guards, all of these establishment medias and et cetera, because people are finding more and more voices, and are finding more and more things that they can kind of relate to. But the problem is people also are tending to just get one perspective and that's it. And I think that's a real issue. That's kind of why I want to bring us together, kind of getting a voice from, like I was talking about before, with Karlyn being kind of new right, Kevin being more conservative, classic right, Truman being politically homeless and doing his best to look the part. And then I see myself as being a progressive traditionalist. I think Kevin would also probably align a little bit more with this too, after we've had conversations about this. And I don't think, Karlyn, you may not have heard me discuss this idea before. So I kind of, seeing how progressives tend to be the ones who pull in political action, I see that there's kind of that, if you kind of reimagine how it works, basically progressives can be seen as just the activist body coming up with ideas and pulling a society in that direction, and that they don't necessarily need to be left. But the thing is, the right doesn't currently have any, though arguably the new right could become that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're like new right, but you want to talk about solutions and moving forward instead of whining about what's happened in the past.
Right. So yeah. So instead of being like a conservative just trying to hold the status quo, I think there's a side that needs to sort of pull towards like the traditional ideals. Like when the country was formed, we did not live up to our ideals, but we have people on the left saying, "Oh, well, those ideals didn't work. Let's go over here and try to let's become this because this will be better." But we don't really right now have anyone kind of pulling back and be like, "No, we just didn't live up to those ideals. Here, let's pull a little closer into them."
Okay.
So
I don't mean to be offensive when I say you're not doing that. I'm being a little bit facetious because I just got off Twitter with a lot of people whining. So I didn't mean to offend anyone in that.
Oh, no problem.
A very offensive crowd here.
We all take things so personally.
But to get to your point, James, like I think the reason why politics is so destructive now, and I think I've had this with a conversation with you and Truman, is for so long we were told the two things you are not allowed to talk about is politics and religion. Now, what are like the two things most offensive to talk about now? Like if you are going to go in the opposite direction, is politics and religion. You know, I think religion is completely thrown aside. No one even religious people are trying not to use religion and being like, well, I'm a believer, but let's put that aside. You know, I think politics is so volatile.
To Islam and it still works. Yes, you cannot talk about Islam.
Right. And it's by not allowing anyone to talk about it at the dinner table, you know, talk about it with your family, it now comes out as now, okay, you can talk about it, but it's the Overton window is a double pane glass where, you know, the left has a Overton window that's huge and the right, it's like microscopic. And that's because really they have ownership, they have power over that Overton window and kind of, you know, again, the devices in which we exchange information. But I think just for so long, by not allowing people to talk about it, now all of a sudden we ramped it up that it's fashionable to talk about. You know, I said in 2016, everyone is freaking out about Colin Kaepernick and how the NFL's ratings are dropping. And they're like, oh, it's because of all this. They're trying to get political. It's like, no, that's not why the ratings are dropping, and also dropped in 2020. It's because politics is a more entertaining sport than the NFL is. That is why. Because it's become a sport now. It's just a full team sport, and that's because we weren't allowed to talk about what politics actually is. And this is not my argument to say everyone should be invested in politics. No, like my thing is, if you are interested in politics, you should never hold public office. Like that is my litmus test. If you ever try to run for anything, it's like you need to hate it. If you ever run, who's that character in Parks and Rec that Truman looks like? Yeah, like you should be that guy. That is the archetype of the person you should want in office.
All right, Truman for Congress.
Hey, I'm interested in politics and I hate everyone in it. So
exactly. That's my exact point. All right.
Well, here's the issue. Look at the, I see people talking about like Eric Weinstein's been making this point. He's actually starting to worry me a little bit with some of the things he's saying. But one of the things that he's talking about that is true is the last 5 presidents we've had have been like baby boomers that have all been basically the oldest president. Not Obama wasn't the oldest, but Obama's still a boomer.
Well, Biden's not a boomer. He's a silent generation or something.
Or silent, yeah. And so
yeah.
But
I think prehistoric. I don't know.
Yeah, and so his point was talking about how like the olds have to go. Okay, who's the youngs? Kamala Harris is young. AOC is young. Pete Buttigieg is young. Eric Swalwell is young. Kristen Sinema, all of them. Who was the blonde that danced on the desk for 5 seconds? At the gay pride thing, and the Democrat who ran for 5. She dropped.
I think I know who you're talking about. I don't remember.
Anyway, bartended. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Aren't they all bartenders at some point?
Right. But anyway, but they're young, and so. It's not that the olds have to go. The narrative and the way the institutions are being utilized has to change, because there's just young people that just learn. It's like a hermit crab. They just learn that the institution is the shell, and so the old leaves the shell, and then the youngs. Pete Buttigieg is every bit as awful as the oldest boomer or something, but he's young, but he knows how to occupy that space. And so there has to be a different formulation here. I just keep having this thought, because I just see Soul back there over your shoulder, and I keep having the thought of something has to change about how these ideas are packaged and distributed, because they're not getting traction. They're not working. The right ideas aren't working. And I think it has to do with the institutions and the way it's being controlled. And here's the thing that really does worry me about the right now. I was talking to some friends a couple weeks ago with the Capitol stuff. And I said, here's what really pisses me off, is that we were kind of fighting a one front war, in that it was the woke left, the far left orthodoxy crap that was infiltrating the institutions. And it was, okay, how do you deal with this cancerous, ideology and all of the things that are kind of tangentially related to it. But now we have to worry about, there's, however many millions of people pissed off on the right that are completely disenfranchised, completely silenced, completely shut out of the conversation. And, like I keep talking about Chesterton's fence, now are like, yeah, F it. I have a good reason. Let's tear the fence down. And so now there's a 2-front thing, because we have to look out for what the left is doing, but also look out for someone who is every bit of what the media claimed Donald Trump was, but who actually is that, to rise up, because those people were just mad about Obama, but now they're going to be labeled terrorists, and they are being labeled terrorists. So, I mean, you can only push good people who want to be left alone so far. And, I'm not justifying any of that but I don't, it doesn't bother me that much either. What happened at the Capitol. I'll just be honest. It really doesn't bother me that much. In the same way that the stuff with BLM, some of those things didn't bother me that much. Some of the protesting that was, big and loud, didn't really bother me that much. I think Scott Adams calls it a forceful tap on the shoulder. It doesn't really bother me that much. But what does concern me is that we also have to watch the rear and look out for someone. I think someone will come out of the podcast space, alternative media space, who's going to gain a big following and is going to speak to all these issues, and it's going to be every bit as awful as what they think Trump was, and we'll be able to tap into that rage and frustration on the right. And so either way, I'll close it out here. And what I'm saying is that there needs to be an information flow both ways that is practical, that taps into the emotion, like what you were saying, Karlyn, about how the right, doesn't address the emotions. Well, that's all anyone is running on right now is emotion. And so there has to be something that taps into the emotion, but uses logic. And it's not just the information, but how do you get it to them? We're facing this stuff with big tech. Like everything seems so insurmountable right now that it's like you don't even know where to begin. And so I don't know what to do about that specific part, but we have to address the relationship with institutions without also encouraging people to tear them down. And the thing about the Daily Wire stuff, I'll tell you, man, I think it's cool they made that movie, but I don't think the answer to, whenever I hear Ben or Clavin or Jeremy Boring talk about it, I don't think the answer to things being taken over with left-wing thought is to build new institutions overtaken with right-wing thought. It's you get the ideology out of them. Like they're bad because they were corrupted by having ideology driving them, not, so you don't answer it with just making a new thing overtaken with a different ideology. Entertainment's good because it shouldn't have any of that in it. So I don't know. I don't even know what the hell I was talking about there. I'm sorry. The end.
I totally agree with that point. I feel like right now, the right is there. I feel like across all spectrums on the right, from just like the thought leaders that are out there to just like the average people, I feel like everyone is preparing for the fact that civil war and secession are almost inevitable. And I don't think it has to be that way. I mean, again, like I've really and this has only been in the last couple of days, so admittedly I don't have a tremendous amount of information right now, but I have been vetting on both sides with MAGA and with BLM. Do we have more in common than we disagree on? And I've been having private conversations with BLM people that are not public and out there because obviously they don't want that just yet, but and I've been doing it pretty publicly on Twitter with MAGA, and there is a lot more that we agree on that we're just not talking about. I do not believe that civil war is inevitable. I do not believe that it benefits us as just people to say, okay, well, we just need to go our separate ways, and all the red people go live in the red states and all the blue people go live in the blue states, and we'll have separate banking, we'll have separate entertainment, everything will be separate. I don't think that that's good. That exacerbates the problem. What we need to do is figure out ways to try to, what you focus on grows. It's really that simple. If you want to focus on all the things that we disagree on all the things that we don't have in common, on all the things that separate us, then that is what is going to grow. But I think that we should instead start, now that, I love Trump as much as the next person, but Trump frankly inhibited a lot of conversation because as soon as that was brought into it, everyone went their own separate ways. With Trump out of office, someone else in there, we don't even need to worry about whether Biden is good or bad at this point. We can actually maybe return to a place where we can focus on the things that we have in common. Because if we want to bring this back together, we have got to start focusing on what we have in common rather than what we don't. And I think if we actually started to do that, we would be able to have a lot more productive conversations. And I think it's one of those things, again, where you always have some guy that comes in and is like, well, maybe we agree on this one thing, but I disagree on thing X, Y, B, and Z. Well, that's not actually productive. You have to start by focusing on the goal, on what you want. I'll do BLM as an example. The average BLM activist simply just wants the police not to shoot innocent Black people. That's what they want, right? And they want more money. And they want more money invested in social services, which I also don't actually think is that bad of an idea. Can we agree on that goal? Police should not shoot innocent Black people, and maybe social services could use a little bit of a boost. Yes. Well, if we can agree on that goal, then everything else does not matter. We don't have to have a conversation about whether or not there is actually a proliferation of police shooting innocent black men. We don't have to have that conversation because we agree on the goal. And then we can focus on what we agree on and how can we do that? Because I think, a rational person is going to say that if a police officer shoots one innocent black man, that's probably one innocent black man too many. Is it only one person? Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not a valid concern. Right. And given history, I think that we can understand why it might be a valid concern, why they might think maybe it's just one guy, but that could spread, that could be my kid that's next. That is valid. And we need to start validating that these concerns come from someplace and instead focus on, well, is this a real problem, or are the police killing more unarmed white men than they are black men? That doesn't help solve the problem. Let's agree on the goal and start there.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and to go back to what Soul always said a lot, is we're so focused on believing that there's a solution and not understanding that every decision's a trade-off. There's always a little bit of bad that comes with the good. And an example that you just put up, Karlyn, is like if you say it's illegal for cops to shoot any criminal, well, guess what's going to happen? Crime's going to skyrocket because they're not going to have as much of an incentive to not do crime, right? So there's going to be a trade-off there. And like you say, you don't want to say trade-offs like, well, if one innocent black guy died, like, you don't want that, right? You don't want any innocent black people dying. But, thinking that there's a perfect solution, I think this really comes out of and I'm gonna do the conservative thing here, the Marxist ideology, kind of this belief that we can change the human condition rather than understanding the circumstances and building in incentives, understanding all of the flaws that we have as human beings, is a message that the right, I would say, is trying to put out there, but not doing a good job at doing that, where the left can just be like, okay, I have power. We have all the power in the government. We have all this money. Let's just give it to you. If you're poor, I'm just going to give you money, and we're going to think that solves the problem, right? Because if we believe, kind of like what you said, like we need to understand what the problem is. If the problem is there's too many poor people, okay, well, just give them a bunch of money. There won't be any poor people anymore, right? But that's not the actual problem. The actual problem is there's not people who are either can't be productive or are not incentivized to be a part of the economy, right? That's the problem. So just giving them money will not solve that problem. You need to find a way to incentivize them to get into the workforce. And then obviously there's a percentage of the population that's unfortunate that build with cognitive disabilities. You have to be able, a good, healthy society, and this is something that the right doesn't like to say, you have to be able to take care of those people in some way. And I know Jordan Peterson makes that, a big thing, kind of before he went off the scene for a little bit, is the unfortunate reality is there's some people who just can't contribute, and we need to find ways to make sure that they don't fall behind, because that's not good for anyone.
Well, yeah. You give a good example there, but let me play this out based on focusing on the thing we have in common first, right? The thing we have in common is we want people to be able to have jobs where they can make enough money, where they can support themselves and feed their family and take care of their needs. That is our common goal, right? And so how do we make that happen? Well, we're going to have to make sure there are opportunities for people to do that. We're going to have to make sure those opportunities are not inhibited based on race or gender or sexual orientation or like whatever the thing. We're going to have to take care of, put systems in place to take care of people who maybe are outside the norm of like the standard deviations of like people who can take advantage of those opportunities. We're going to have to account for them too. We can account for all of these attributes and make sure we're meeting people's concerns as long as we focus on the goal first of like, yeah, we want you to have opportunities. We want you to be able to make money. We want you to be able to make as much money as you want to make and do something that you find fulfilling. We don't disagree on that. We simply disagree on exactly how to get there. And maybe we can come up with solutions. Like if Kevin has some ideas, Truman has some ideas, James, you have some ideas, I have some ideas. Well, why can't we put solutions in place that speak to all of these ideas? On some level, give everyone a win, or give as many people as you kind of win as possible, and just stop, this idea that we have to focus in on one solution and one solution only, and it can only speak to the right ideology or the left. Is just not true. We can come up with solutions that speak to both, as long as, to your point, Kevin, like I think there's got to be like some compromise and some give in that, and you have to acknowledge that sometimes to get something you want, you're going to have to give up a little bit of what you want too in order to give someone else something that they want. And actually, I'm going to tell a quick story about this because this is something I actually used to teach this in organizations. I actually taught a whole course about office politics and how you play office politics effectively to actually get stuff done. And it's actually not too dissimilar. And I had this one point where I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people, speak at South by Southwest several years ago. And he was talking about how when he was governor of California, what he did was he tried to bring all the stakeholders in California that were working on healthcare in some capacity together to try to fix healthcare in California. And he going into the conversation, he told every single one of them, and this was people across the spectrum, right? Because it was just all the stakeholders around healthcare. Going into the conversation, he said, every single person coming into this meeting has got to be prepared to walk out of it with a 7 out of a 10. If you walk into this meeting expecting to get a 10 out of a 10, we are all going to lose. Because if you get a 10, that means someone else gets a 3, and then the whole thing falls apart. We've got to start compromising to get the things that are really the most important to us while also giving other people wins in the process.
Yeah. So here's a question based on that. Whenever you're saying we have more in common, which you're right, by the way, I think that the reality is that you could make a Venn diagram, and the middle part of where all these different groups that you would maybe think wouldn't agree is going to be actually pretty big. But the question is, do you think that those in charge of the institutions are actually incentivized to encourage that, or do they get more out of keeping us divided? Because I think they actually want to keep us divided. I think they want, like on the right, I think they want people to view BLM and Antifa and all that other stuff as like all of the left is a bunch of terrorist communists, trying to, implement a socialist dystopia. And I think on the left, those in charge of the institutions who are, in the power, want everyone to see, all of their constituents to see the right, or anyone who doesn't agree with them really, as a racist, bigot, white supremacist, terrorist now, at this point. And I just don't see anyone who is, kind of the ones holding the reins being incentivized to try and get us to get along, because they profit off of our disunity. I like Ben Shapiro. This is just one example, but Ben Shapiro, his shtick is red meat about the left. I mean, you'll hear people like Joe Rogan or Eric Weinstein talk about Ben Shapiro and how he's very different in person than he is on his show. That his shtick is he throws red meat. I mean, Tucker Carlson's the same way. So is what's her name on MSNBC? I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, Rachel Maddow. So is Don Lemon. And so their shtick is to, why did Don Lemon and, that one group, they did this, and then they kind of did a repeat of it. Anderson Cooper did, when he talked about how they're all going to go back to their Olive Gardens and Holiday Inns and stuff. But why would they do that? And remember that whenever they were doing your numbers are hard, reading's hard, they're mocking conservatives, when that was, Don Lemon and two other, it was a 3-person panel. But why would they do that? One, they feel contempt for the other side. And two, they know that their group likes it. If they were to talk about, I mean, again, going back to the Twitter example, if they were to criticize their own team or try to humanize the other side, they have conditioned their base to be allergic to that. And so I worry about the incentive structure of, especially those in the legacy media and the legacy establishment, to disunity, how they're incentivized. We were talking a lot about incentives. All these things are unsustainable, by the way, but the incentive towards lies over truth, the incentive towards giving away liberty as opposed to prioritizing it, and the incentive for disunity and to sow discord as opposed to unity is pretty strong. And so, one, do you guys think that that's correct, that it seems like those who are kind of steering the ship are more interested in keeping us divided? And two, what do we do about that? And I have another question about the media that I want to run by you guys, but that I can do that later.
I would
100
agree.
Sorry, James. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I definitely would agree that they're completely incentivized to push a part of thinking of that Venn diagram example. As you were saying that, I was just like, so you have America in this Venn diagram, and I was imagining just like the logos of like CNN and Fox pushing on the outsides of the opposite ones, trying to push them as far apart as possible, because that grows at least their portion of an audience, and there do need to be more incentives both for them to not do that, as well as incentives, or maybe not necessarily even just incentives for them to not do, but there just need to be forces pulling it together, just like was it like Hercules with Spider-Man with the ropes, just pulling the I think in the recent Spider-Man game, he like pulled a
Webs,
bridge
not
together or
ropes,
something.
man. Come on.
Webs.
There's also the Spider-Man 2 movie where
He's
just
talking
like,
about the
stopped train.
1950s Spider-Man. They weren't advanced enough. CGI was not as far as it is today.
I don't think we're gonna ever. There's never going to be an incentive for media to try to bring people together. Media makes their money by pushing people apart. Media makes their money. I mean, what they're doing is they're leaning on that outrage, right? They're leaning on emotion. When it bleeds, it leads. That is, I mean, that has always been true of the media. The problem is that now it's to such a state that I don't think there's an incentive. I don't think that's going to be pulled back. I really don't. The only disincentive is people need to stop watching it. That is the only disincentive that the media understands. But overall, I do definitely agree with what Truman said. And this is part of why I think that it's so important for groups like MAGA and like BLM to see that they do actually have more in common, because the enemy is not each other. The enemy is the people in power, and it is the media. And if we can join we disagree, those two groups disagree on a lot of things, and that is okay to disagree on some of those things. We can have the argument about whether or not there should be universal health care, or government pulled out of health care later. There is a bigger problem right now, and that is that the people in power and the people running the media don't give a flip about any of us, and that they are actively incentivized to keep creating and enhancing this divide. Every single day, these people are in power. They're only dividing us. That is the only thing that's happening. And they're not going to stop until we all come together and say, no, 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 no. You're not playing this game with us anymore.
Yeah.
I would. Sorry, James, you can go if you want.
I was just gonna say, and that's why we have groups like this, like Ember here, trying to sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say hold the center, but just kind of bring things together in a way where we have this open conversation, and where we can say to people, okay, maybe you hate me, but what is making you hate me? Like we can disagree. There's plenty of people that I've disagreed with in my life. I'm sure there's plenty of people you've disagreed with in your life who you haven't hated. Why is there hate here? And who is making us hate each other?
Yeah, so I think I may have like a more nuanced view on this, or just a completely different view on this. But to me, there's three kinds of people. I'll use the left as examples of these. I think there is AOC. She is someone, I think, who, whatever, you think about her intelligence, there's some people who think she's really bright, some people think she's really dumb. It doesn't matter. I think she is trying to do the best she can given the circumstances and the solutions she thinks she has. She's like the type one, I would say, where she's actually trying to do the best she can. And that's a vast majority of people. You talk about BLM supporters. I'm willing to bet a vast majority of BLM supporters are good people. They just might believe in a narrative that may not be true, but they're fighting against an injustice they believe is there. And so I think I would consider AOC one of those types that I don't think she's doing anything evil, or at least not, doing it purposely being evil. It's like there's not a lot of like evil characters. You used to see in the James Bond movies where there's like an evil guy just doing things because he likes to be evil. That's extremely rare, I think, in the world, to have someone that just does things out of evil. So I think type one of the AOCs who try to be well-intentioned, their just solutions are really bad. Then there's type two, which I would say more on the evil side. This is what I'd say Pelosi. Pelosi knows, she's old enough to know what she's doing. She's a bad person. Like that to me is a no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There are some just bad people who are old enough to understand, okay, this solution doesn't work, but I'm going to keep people divided because, that's going to advantage me. And really, I think it all comes down to survival. I mean, they're not just, having people split apart because they enjoy it. They do it because they know they'll survive because of it. And then I think there's a third person which I would consider Bernie. He's the true believer. I think he thinks he's well-intentioned, but he's so deep inside his own sub-narrative that he truly believes 2 + 2 makes 5. Like that's the kind of true believer I believe he is. And that's why he's sort of a special case in this case. But I kind of bring this all up because, when it comes to media, trying to keep us divided or even trying to build up, narratives that are, more shocking because it gets more views. That's an us problem. I don't really think it's a them problem. That's an us problem. We need to stop enjoying it so much. We need to start celebrating people rather than tearing them down. You have 2 articles side by side saying, look at the accomplishments of this person and look at this person that got out of a limousine and she wasn't wearing underwear and showed her whatever while getting out and someone took a picture of it. Everyone's going to click on that other one, not the one that's celebrating the accomplishments. Like that, I think that's an us problem. That's a cultural problem. I don't know the perfect way to fix it, but that's the way I see things because, kind of as I've told Truman before, the way I view people is I don't think there's such thing as an evil person. I don't think there's such thing as a good person. There are only good and evil ideas. And sometimes an evil idea, you take someone that the most evil person you can think of, like Hitler, he's a person that this evil idea, infected his brain like a mind parasite. And that's the reason, we condemn him as a person so much is because he was just gripped by this evil idea so much. But, I don't think people are born evil. They just have these very, very evil ideas that attach to them. And I think it's good to understand that because we don't want to say everyone from BLM is an awful person. No, most of them are very, very good people, well-intentioned, but they just may not believe in the same things we believe in.
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts about what you just said, Kevin. Most of them are not. I don't agree with a lot of that. That's okay. But the people who are labeling anyone, MAGA anything domestic terrorist and wanting to push for MAGA to be a domestic terrorist thing, that's evil. That's wrong. That's malicious. I think you would define it by whenever you say there is no. If you're doing something or trying to get something done that is malicious, then yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah, but
we
do
don't have
you
to get
believe
into
your
the semantic weeds?
we've already had this conversation before. But
Yeah,
if you believe the other person is evil, that you have to take them out, like you're going to do anything you can to take them out, even if it's
not
malicious.
if you think evil is dynamic. Not if you think that people can change. So that would be the way I would nuance that. I think that people can.
Well, they would have to believe that, and I don't think they believe that.
Well, sure, but my point is that there's a reason. I can't remember what the name of that guy is, but there's that black dude that would go to all those KKK rallies, and he keeps the hoods of the KKK guys that he, convinces to walk away from white supremacy because they did have malicious desires and evil ideology that they'd embraced, but they changed. So I think that you can still say, dude, this is malicious, this is wrong, this is harmful, but I don't think that you have to persist in those things. But that's a whole other thing. The question that I have that I think is the other thing that's kind of stuck in my mind, I don't know how to quantify what I'm about to say, but I think you guys might, know what I'm talking about. So everyone, I believe, here has heard someone say, Karlyn, I think I've heard you say this before about like the media, the chaos around Trump, right? And how there was all this chaos and people just were tired of the chaos and the chaos and the chaos. The problem I have is I don't know how much of that, like I genuinely, it could be 100. I don't know how much of that was Trump because I was talking, this was during one of Bridget Fettis's Locals things, and she was talking about how people were just sick of the chaos and how, there was, some people she knew that were really today, how much, more relaxing her life was. And I said, sure, but what if someone was texting you 30 times a day and calling you 30 times a day and you could not ignore the call saying, can you believe what so-and-so is doing? Guess what they're doing right now? Oh my gosh, guess what they said? Guess what they did? And having that shoved in your face. And the issue I have is we don't know how much of the chaos was Trump down our throat, but I thought to have, and we've already started to have the formations of a test case with Joe Biden, because the chaos was just the media choosing to focus on certain stories, turn things into stories that weren't stories, focus on things that were said that they didn't have to. And what we saw them do that with racist comments Biden made, stuff with Hunter Biden's laptop, and his mental foible, all the stuff with the National Guard thing, that all those National Guard troops sleeping on the floor and all these places in parking. Like, so the issue I have is if it is true that there is that, let's say, whatever you think about the election, that you could say it is at least probable that one of the decisive factors for how people voted was fatigue and wanting to be done with this sense of the chaos. And if that's true, if there was enough people that influenced the election, then, and we don't know how much of that chaos was Trump and how much of it was the media just choosing to focus on certain stories. Because again, how much positive coverage did he get? Stuff with the Middle East, stuff with the new trade deals that we got with Canada, I forgot what the Canada and Mexico one, the USMCA, I think it was. Like, there was no the stuff with lowering drug prices, like all of those things, there was no positive coverage. So if it's true that the media, if they coalesce and like mobilize in a unified way, can gin up enough of the chaos to be decisive in an election, like, what do you even do about that? Because that another way that feeds into that idea of the division, right? Is that chaos, it's sowing division, it's ramping everyone up to 11 and generating a false perception of things. Like that tells me, if that is true, and that's what I'm trying to bounce off you guys, that they can literally like fabricate an environment. They can fabricate an environment that seems peaceful and normal, back to normal when Obama's drone striking stuff, back to normal when all these Biden swamp creatures are coming in. And whenever good things are happening, it's the chaos and there's Nazis in the White House and fascism and racism everywhere. So what do you even do about that? Is that correct? Do you think I'm right? And if so, what do you do about that?
Well, I think you're correct, but I also think that there is a financial incentive for them to continue to create this chaos. I mean, listen, the media is about to lose a lot of money if they don't find a way to continue this outrage in some way, shape, or form. You have outlets like CNN that are already struggling financially as it is. They literally have no disincentive to stop creating this chaos anytime soon. But I think the answer to it is exactly what we're seeing happening. There is massive
So here's a question. What would be a good way to, how do we put a fine point on this conversation? We can go for however long. It's been about 2 hours, but when I think we've talked about some really good stuff here, and it seems like a good jumping off point in terms of addressing some issues, issues with reality incentives, issues with, how there's only one side, I use the term side for lack of a better one, but only one ideology may be speaking to a lot of issues, and therefore they get to dominate the conversation because they're the only ones, addressing real problems. So we've talked about some good stuff here. What would be a good way to what do we go next with the conversation, or with, I guess, all the things we've talked about?
Well, this is largely just this was mainly meant for us to just kind of introduce ourselves and kind of let people get a feel of what we're talking about here. And I think we've done a really good job of just really introducing this, because this is kind of just the spark of the conversation. And one thing that I just want to bring up is that the purpose of this group, to me, is to really just put my part in and involve you guys in kind of helping to make sure that the U.S. it ends up being more of a phoenix rather than something with just that lifespan that just comes to an end and kind of falls apart. So with that kind of thought in mind, we are going to try to do these monthly. These should go up on the first Saturday of every month. And
can I interrupt you and ask another question based on what you just said?
Sure.
So a phoenix is the bird that rises from the ashes, right? It's a little on the nose, but okay. So
Yeah.
here's the question though. So you're saying you want the US to be more like a phoenix. A phoenix comes from ashes. So the question is, what does it look like? I don't think we're in the ashes yet, personally. I think
No.
we're definitely ablaze, but I don't think we're in the ashes yet. So the question is, because, and you're getting this thought at the same time as I am, but there's a thought I have in my head of, wouldn't it just be better to extinguish the fire? And I don't know, I'm not saying you're saying burn it all down or anything like that, but my point is that yes, you want the US to come out of, this strife, and the West more broadly. We need, Europe to come out of what's going on. It's finished The Strange Death of Europe by Douglas Murray. Great book. We need Europe to figure itself out too. But my point is that, okay, so are we in the ashes yet? If not, what has to happen first? And is there a way to prevent the whole thing from being totally torched so that it doesn't have to be a phoenix? It's more of a, God, the kitchen caught on fire, but fortunately we caught it in time. And so now we just get to do a little bit of a remodel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, how far gone are we? I know the trajectory is off the cliff. That's the trajectory, clearly. But how far to that, I called it the Watchman threshold, but how far, are we away from those ashes, that you're talking about? And is it avoidable to do that? Do you see what I'm saying? The distinction I'm making?
Yeah. So I actually see the phoenix as a few different things. One, I think right now, trying to put the fire out would just leave a burnt bird, kind of like decrepit old bird. I think that is the establishment kind of just forcing things to remain the way they are and forcing themselves to reclaim their power and just keep the old bird going. There's the concept of, so the phoenix is also a symbol of like rejuvenation. So you could see it as not necessarily. So on one hand, the phoenix it can fully die in the fire, turn to ash, and then a new baby phoenix is born. But there's also the potential concept of the phoenix catching a flame, and then it basically sprouts out fully grown and beautiful. So the question isn't, are we going to full ash? The question is, where do we let ourselves burn all the way down to just be something totally new, or do we want to catch ourselves along the way and be able to kind of just be more rejuvenated rather than reborn? So my hope is that it'll be more of a rejuvenation. We will be young and spry again, but not but not necessarily
Ironic given our current leadership.
Yes, very ironic given our current leadership.
Right now, it just seems like it's a crow flying into a dumpster fire. That's the trajectory we're on right now. But we want to course correct.
Yes, we want to course correct. I fully agree with you. But
when there's a forest fire, new growth comes, but it's not new vegetation. So I live near where a lot of forest fires happen, right? So when a bunch of ponderosa pines burn down, new ponderosa pines take their place. We don't get redwoods instead, right?
Exactly.
So my worry is that, all metaphors have their limits, and that in our case, for our society, something very different could replace it, right?
Definitely.
Look at what happens, after revolutions, for example. It's new, not just it's new in kind and in species. It's not a new version of the same old thing. So that's the issue. Why I asked that question is, where are we? Because the closer we get to total
destruction
being leveled,
Yeah.
ideologically, from a social, I think increasingly from a geographic standpoint. I think there is a migration happening in the U.S. That is going to make this problem significantly worse over the next couple of years. But the farther we get to that, the more likely it is that something very different arises, as opposed to what I was talked about at the beginning with Zion. It's just Zion again with new people, but it was the same thing. But the odds of it being the same U.S. built on the same Constitution and the same principles, the same Declaration of Independence, those kinds of things, I think it decreases the more eroded the whole thing becomes. And so that's why I ask, is it possible to just put the fire out as opposed to letting it, play out? And I don't know how realistic that is. And I don't even know necessarily what I mean practically by that, but just from an idea standpoint, you see what I'm saying?
Oh, well, we're in a lucky position because our Bill of Rights is a living document. So we have the ability to take what is there and continuously evolve it. So that's one of the geniuses of our founders, to enable us to be able to evolve with the times. Now, I see all-out civil war basically be like, and I mean like actual like battles, destruction, collapse being that's the the point of no return, which I do somewhat fear could happen if, say, the U.S. dollar lost its place as the international currency of trade, and we faced hyperinflation because of that. Because in a lot of ways, like, you guys know how much money's been printed in the last year, right? Like 50% of them, like a third of the money supply, it increased by 50%.
Like 6 trillion or something like that total. I don't know, 5 trillion. I can't remember.
Yeah, but a lot of that is offset due to the international demand of the dollar. If the dollar ever got displaced, that means all of those dollars would suddenly only be valuable really within the U.S. and maybe with some of our direct trading partners, and that would be a big issue. That would be a point of collapse that I could see coming. I don't actually necessarily see too much from the political end that could push it as hard as that would, because there needs to be it's like tension on a rod. It bends and bends and bends, but sometimes it takes an extra really hard push to break it. So I don't necessarily see I see us as having more time, essentially, because it's very slowly bending, and there isn't anything really.
Of a Cold War? I think it's more of a Cold War, man. I mean,
we've been in a Cold War.
There's all these factors, like the financial thing you just talked about.
Yeah,
but I worry more about the impact of like migration of people along ideological lines, migration to like, I think what Karlyn mentioned earlier, maybe it's Kevin, about like there's conservative and progressive banks and conservative and
yep,
and those kinds of things that the popular, like the thought
so
that
that's
I've had
a
for
slow bending.
Is that whatever happens, if we do divide, it'll be a thing that people look around and go, yeah, that makes sense.
Division guarantees civil war though too.
Yeah, but also, I mean, just go with the war concept. The war has evolved. Like we don't see what we've seen. I mean, the reason, like, World War I was probably the most bloody war of all time because it was the first time we've used somewhat modern weapons, right? It's because people used to sit out there with their bayonets in line, and now there's a machine gun coming at them, and they didn't know what to do. Like, it was the first time that's really happened in war. Vietnam is the first time that the helicopter was implemented. Now we don't see people fighting in war. We see drone strikes. We see people fighting more financial wars, more ideological wars, and that's could a civil war happen? Yes, I think it could very well happen. It's not going to look like the Civil War. We're not going to be fighting each other in the streets. It will be the battle between institutions, and the way it'll be much more of a cultural battle. And yes, I think what Truman said could happen. Definitely wouldn't be a good thing, but a little bit of federalism wouldn't help when migrating to different states and seeing some states become more successful because they implemented more, let's say conservative policy or something like that, more economic friendly policy. But it wouldn't be a good thing. And really, the people asking for revolution, you always got to ask them, what kind of revolution do you want? Do you want an American revolution or do you want a French revolution? Because they're very different. And one, is certainly preferable than the other, although we prefer to come together as Americans before, again, the chicken flies into the dumpster fire or whatever it was. So, we definitely want to make change.
So here's a question. If the year was, all things being the same with the pandemic, let's just take numbers. Okay. Let's say it's 1940 or something, or ignore World War II here just for the sake of thought. But I think you'll get where I'm going with this. If it was 100 years ago, let's do that. And the numbers were the same, would Andrew Cuomo enjoy the same popularity numbers and approval ratings as he does now? Would Ted Wheeler get reelected? Would Gavin Newsom be the governor of California 100 years ago? Everything else being the same.
I mean, especially given the technologies people focus on just their local environments, I'm sure no.
Yep. I think that's correct. So that's the other issue that I'm thinking about with this, is that 100 years ago, those people would have been held accountable to the people around them for their awful decision-making. Right. But now they don't have to, because of the way information is flattened out geography and made everywhere the same. They can do that. So what do you, if that's true, then Kevin, what made me think about that is you said something about federalism. And so something, a thought I've had since the election is that federalism has gotten, it's failing for reasons that are artificial, because of the technology. Now, the concept still is good and works, but it's artificially failing because
I'd say it's a large federal government giving subsidies to states, and now states are beholden to the federal government. That's what's killing it.
Well, no. So I think we're talking about two different things. You're right about that. I'm talking about just local populations holding local leaders accountable for decisions impacting the locality.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Most people don't know who their local legislator is, but they all know who the president is, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
and
I think that's a problem.
Their concept of who is really in charge of their lives is all out of whack. So what made me think of that is you're talking about the way, because we see Elon Musk, is going to leave California, right? And, Daily Wire left California, people leaving to go to Texas and Florida. And, there's a big tech boom in North Carolina. And so, but that doesn't have the social power that it should have, because there's a disconnect between the reality of localism and local decision making and people's understanding of it, because it's just everything is about the biggest, the Fed and global stuff. And, people caring more about what French leaders think of our country than how effective their mayor is, for example, or something. So does that make sense? There's a bug in that I don't really know how to address, but that thought experiment about Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom and Ted Wheeler, I think is really important, because then you have to ask the question, what's the difference? Well, there's a lot of differences, but one of the main ones is the people would know that they were the ones who were effing up their lives. And now they don't know that. They're not realizing that. So what do you do about that?
I would say it's a short-term effect. Long-term, you have enough companies leave California and people start losing their jobs, and they're going to be like, oh, hey, dear leader, this is happening under your reign. Why is this happening? So I think you're correct in the short term. But in long term, when people's jobs start to get affected, I think they will look at the people who are in charge and being like, why did this happen?
Washington, D.C. has had a Democratic mayor for literally since its inception. It's had the same policies since it started electing mayors.
Well, Washington, D.C. also shouldn't be a town.
It's not
never meant
my
to be.
point is that okay, maybe you're right. I don't see any evidence of that, is my point. And how much damage is going to be done to the country while we're waiting for that to, people to figure that out, because those metropolitan hive minds are literally controlling this entire country.
Well, I think when you have a town that's never had the opportunities, continue to not have the opportunities, there's nothing to compare it to. So if you're saying, I don't know the economic history of Washington, D.C., the town, not the place where all the snakes live. But I know if they didn't come from anything, like if you compare it to Detroit, who is thriving, one of the biggest growing cities in America, and then all of a sudden goes down the tank, like everyone left there. I mean, there's more coyotes in the streets than there were people, and now it's starting to grow back again. There's still a lot of business in Michigan, but I think that's an example of what would happen when everyone leaves. So you got to compare it to a place that is growing, trending upward, and then all of a sudden shoots downward sharply. So there's got to be a major change somewhere in the system. You can't have a place that's been nothing there and continues to have nothing there. But your point is well taken when it comes to how long it's going to take, how much damage is this problem going to make before people course correct, and when does it become too far? When does the bird catch too much flames and not going to be able to rise up again? That's a big problem, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I just had a thought on this. What was it? I was thinking that looking at, well, there's a lot of depth to this issue and I think there's part of it's a principled depth because we sort of lost focus and somewhere along the way, the U.S. shifted their principles from focusing on local control to federal aid. Like instead of local failure, they looked at federal failure, or instead of local problems, they started looking at federal problems. And I think a lot of that happened back during the Great Depression. There was this shift of, like, you had to deal with the Hoovervilles, and suddenly it wasn't just, oh, we're mad because something's failing in our state. The whole country failed at once then. And it started to be shifted from people really paying attention more locally to paying attention more federally. And you can see this progression of more and more federal institutions coming up during the early 20th century. We had the development of federal income tax, and and if you look at something like that, I'm just going to look at the federal. Created. I'm actually just going to look at the federal income tax right now for an example of this, because initially the U.S. was funded through tariffs. When there are tariffs, you pay more for a product. Okay, very understandable. But for the layperson, you're just seeing that your stuff is this price. If you're working off of federal income taxes, well, suddenly the federal government is putting themselves directly in your lives and taking money from you. So now, okay, you're aware you're not paying as high as prices, but you didn't even realize you were paying that. You don't even necessarily realize you were paying higher prices before. Or you may just be like, okay, well, whatever, they're higher. These prices are up. Now you're directly having the government come in and take money from you. It's like, oh, now you're paying attention to the federal government because they're getting involved. Then you have the federal government involving themselves with the Great Depression, making the Hoovervilles and whatnot. And then the New Deal happened. And over time, more and more types of federal policies were being made that made them more involved, that made the federal government more involved in the daily lives of people. And slowly but surely, it shifted people's mindset to focus more on on going to the federal government for anything that happens, as opposed to focusing on local institutions. That's kind of my more armchair take on armchair analysis on all of that stuff. So it seems to me that, so I am expecting there to be some amount of fire again. Like right now, I see us in a place where, using the metaphor from before, where Biden tried to put out the flame on the bird, and now it's the decrepit old bird. I see there being the need for that fire, basically just to burn off the detritus of the federal government and try to figure out, come to a point where we're just like, we're collapsing and we need to figure out what stays and what goes. And then we're going to need to kind of look at our Constitution and be like, okay, what do we need to do with this to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I think making it so that the federal government cannot be so involved in things that should be local issues would be one of those types of things. I think that would be, I think there should be more
domain
power.
dependence? You know what domain dependence is?
No, I haven't heard that phrase before.
You guys heard that? You read Nassim Taleb? So domain dependence is this idea that where you know a principle is true and you apply it really well in one area, but you fail to recognize its application in other areas. So the example Taleb uses is, says a doctor will tell you get lots of exercise, go out, push your body, so that it grows through adversity. But then if you have the slightest little bug, they'll say, take an antibiotic. So it's domain dependence. Your body needs to, I'm not saying all antibiotics are bad, but the point is they understand how pushing your body is really good in this one area, but not in this other area. And so the thought I have about why I said domain dependence there, you're talking about people's focus on the federal government. People don't call the FBI if someone's trying to break into their house, right? They don't do that. They call their local police department. And so there's a level where people understand this really, maybe deep in their unconscious. They understand that local versus, federal far out issue, but they don't apply it, all across the board. And so they'll apply it when it's in their face, right? Again, you don't call the FBI or the CIA or NSA if someone's breaking in your house. You call the closest possible thing to do something about it. But at the same time, they'll blame the federal government for something that is really their mayor or their governor's decision that caused that. And so what you're saying is right, James. I agree with you. I'm writing a lot about that right now. The disconnect there of people, drifting gradually. My point is that they understand it, but they don't know how to apply it. And I think part of that is the reality distortion lenses that the media applies. Part of it's just the way we're raised, I think, with the narratives that we're given. There's just things that are just assumed, cultural things that we take for granted. And I think one of them is that emphasis on the federal government is just so ubiquitous that no one really has to tell you that. It's just becomes part of your schema without it ever being something you're told. And so, but I don't know what to do about that because people know it. They just don't know it in all areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Here's a good question. When did people start saying the president was the most powerful man in the world?
Probably when he started dropping bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I would imagine.
Probably. So I think we are where we currently are. There is that. There's definitely that regard to federal institutions, and especially when it comes to what people would consider bigger issues. But I think one of the simplest ways to reform this, and again, I think that this needs to be done through leaders, not necessarily through the lay people. There's a saying that most people, I'm not sure how I feel about this saying actually, but there is a saying that some people are shepherds, some people are sheep. Not really sure. I don't feel good about that statement, but at the same time, most people just kind of go along with the way things are. A lot of people just want to be left on their own, left to do their things, and just kind of exist through life in this sort of like status quo type of mentality. And it takes like people who are willing to put themselves out there in order to make changes, in order to sort of set the stage, as it were.
We need some elite philosopher kings to tell all the plebes.
Well, not necessarily like that, but sure, we can go with that metaphor. But one, and this is why we have a representative. This may be why we want to have which is why we have a more representative system. But we may want to, one thing we could say that we could do would be to look at our Constitution and say, all right, look at the 10th Amendment, how it says all things are left up to the state or the people. Okay, make it so that anything that isn't, so make it so addendum to that in order to have anything added, it needs to be added to the either the Bill of Rights or Constitution. There needs to be a constitutional amendment in order to for the federal government to gain these more additional powers. Like that would be one way of at least mitigating it, and it could help. It could help leave more of an impact on the people, because most people don't even really think about the 10th Amendment. If you put it more in people's heads, if you build the society and therefore the government around this concept of more local control, local responsibilities and whatnot, then you can kind of help influence the way that the culture will go, and at least put brakes on the dissolution of it.
Yeah, I think a simple thing that'll help just to kind of help people think about this correctly is, we keep talking about these representatives, but so often we use the language of our leaders. It's not what our leaders are doing. It's like, well, no, they're not your leaders. They're your representatives. I think it's important to use language like that. Doesn't mean you treat them with less respect or anything like that. But like, you're the one who leads your own life. The president's considered a leader because he leads a lot of things. He does not lead your life. He's not your leader. And we need to understand we are supposed to be, kind of a self-governed people. And we forget that very often. And I think looking at your leader like you look at your dad is a bad way to look at the government. And I think starting as simple as there will help course correct a lot of the stuff that's going wrong now.
Yeah.
And the fact that people aren't doing that is why I put it in that essay I wrote a couple weeks ago. But increasingly, culture is downstream from politics for the exact reason of what you just said. So it's all topsy-turvy because there are these people that are looking to their political leaders to tell them how to be culturally, instead of, how it should be naturally, which is saying, no, you represent me, which definitionally you should get your cues from me, not the other way around. But I think there's a lot of people where that arrangement has become flipped mentally. So there's a lot of people looking to AOC and Bernie Sanders to tell them how they should think culturally and how they should think ideologically. Anyway, but so, all right, let's put a fine point on this. Some might say land the plane, Kevin. Yeah. So let's bring it to a close. What do we do here?
Yeah. I mean, well, first off, you guys can all plug your channels if you want, or your communities. Where can people find you all?
I'm on Locals, kb.locals.com. I also have a YouTube channel, Karlyn Borysenko.
All right.
Great. I'm on Locals as well under Engineering Politics. So it's engineeringpolitics.locals.com, on Twitter for now, on Parler, YouTube. I can find all my stuff there.
And I'm on Etsy with Truman's Essential Oils. I just mostly get them from it's dumb.
But do you sell yarn, Truman? But do you sell yarn?
I don't. I can spin you a yarn, a tail there. That was the cheesiest. Anyway,
I got your oil last week. It bumped up my credit score about 5 points. So it works.
It should increase your virility as well. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but no, on returntoreason.locals.com. I'm still on Twitter. I'll be there till they kick me off. That's at My Mundane Mind, and then on YouTube at Return to Reason as well. Is where you can find all that.
All right. And I am James Derian, Commutation Constructs at .locals.com. Don't worry, I will have links in the description for all of our channels. And I am also on YouTube at Commutation Construct, Gab, Minds, and MeWe at James Derian, and as well, and Twitter at Commutation C. Anyhow, this has been the first episode of Ember. I would like to thank you all for joining here. I would like to thank all you guys for helping host this.
Can I say something real fast, James?
Sure, go for it.
I'm pretty much a cynical, black-pilled person right now most of the day, but I do appreciate you putting this together. And like I said at the beginning, you know, the first time you talked about doing this when we got together, there were certainly some things there that I was not real keen on, and we can get into those some other point in time. But the point that I really was trying to emphasize, and I think is what matters, is, you know, it's always better to try and do something that is, you know, for the better, that's positive, than to do nothing, especially now. You know, what's that Optimus Prime quote? Fate rarely calls on us at a moment of our choosing. You know, he's a fictional robot, but he's not wrong. And that's where all of us who live, you know, in this time right now, whether we like it or not, this is when we're born. And every time, every age asks different things of you, whether it was during the Great Depression or World War II or the Civil War or the Revolutionary War or Manifest Destiny, any of those other things. Every age you're born into is going to ask different things of you and require different things of you. And this is just what this age requires. And so I appreciate the fact that, you know, you're encouraging us and others to rise to the challenge of now, and to, you know, try to do something meaningful and positive to try and keep the ship afloat. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, man. It's good. This is cool.
I appreciate that. I think we can build something special here, and I think that's important. Anyhow, this is us signing off.
Who's
Later,
recording?
everyone.
See ya.
Well, hey, stop recording and let's talk for a second after we